In this update, this weather is about to take a significant turn. We've got a complex that's diving in from the Aleutian Islands that's going to be entering the Pacific Northwest with some heavier rainfall, especially along the coastal areas. But once it gets inland, it's really going to be starting to rapidly deepen with this low pressure center and really starting to get its act together across portions of Utah into Wyoming, especially into Colorado here, where they could be looking at some heavier snow starting to fly. And then further to the south, we've got Hurricane Category 4 Hurricane Lydia, 140-mile-per-hour hurricane that impacted just south of Puerto Vallarta last night. Now that has actually dissipated, but the remnants of that system has drawn in that precipitation, and it's going to be moving across the Gulf of Mexico and spreading those heavier rains back into the southeast, into Florida, and we could be looking at some severe weather later on tonight into tomorrow into the Florida region. So if you take a look at the overall water vapor imagery, you can kind of see where these two storm systems kind of lie. You got the first northern polar jet bringing in some colder air associated with it. We're going to have some snow starting to fly into portions of Idaho, into just northwest of the Salt Lake City region, into places like Casper, Wyoming, especially into western portions of Colorado. And then further to the south, we've got that complex of activity that's going to be highlighted just south of Alabama here. And that's going to be spreading its moisture into the southeast, but especially back into central Florida as we get deeper into the evening, going into tomorrow as well. So if you are new to the channel and like detailed weather breakdowns, hit the subscribe button and you're in. You get all my daily content on this channel. And I would love to reach 225,000 subscribers by the end of the year. And you can help me get there by subscribing to the channel and following all my daily content. So let's get to the details on the severe weather front, because later on tonight we are looking at some elevated storms that could turn severe, and if not tornadic. It's almost like a little tropical type entity, tropical, spin ups within this region, within the Tampa region, into Orlando, back into the Gainesville region, all these areas up here into Jacksonville, into Panama City, even far south, going into Fort Myers region. You need to be on high alert, especially as we get deeper into the evening, and it's going to be an overnight type of setup going into the later evening time frame into the overnight. If you look at the radar, what it might look like about 4 or 5 o'clock this afternoon, there's that heavier rain spreading into the Pensacola region, into Montgomery, especially into Birmingham, Alabama, into Atlanta region, all the way up here to Columbia, Charleston, but especially further south, those heavier storms could turn severe back into Tampa, back into the Orlando region, getting into the Jacksonville region. So these are the areas that you got to be on high alert, as some of those could turn on severe side, and can't roll out some of those isolated spin up tornadoes within this region. But further to the northwest, around midnight tonight, that snow is really going to be starting to fly in a good part of Yellowstone region, just northwest of the Salt Lake City region. But the heavier snows will continue to expand and intensify as the low pressure will continue to start to deepen, likely all the way down to about a 985 millibar low pressure. Some of these areas can't even roll out over a foot of snow, heavier snow, likely the most significant snow so far we've seen this fall. So, but we do have an active jet streak that's going to be coming across this, where I think it starts to hit its more or less peak intensity going into tomorrow afternoon. We've got a dry slot further to the south from those southwest winds. So you're in that kind of the zone where you're not going to be able to see much of anything within this zone across the southwest. But to the north, and especially to the northeast of that, to where that low pressure is, we've got to be concerned about some of those severe storms as we head into tomorrow afternoon. So the Storm Prediction Center has kind of already highlighted an area of concern across the North Platte region, back into the Hastings region, into Omaha, back further south into Topeka, into Wichita. That extends into the Kansas City region, heading into later tomorrow into the overnight time frame. And there's the overall setup over the next kind of 48 hours. So you've got that moisture that impacted portions of, South Texas and Houston this morning. Now that's actually moved off and spreading those heavier rains back into the southeast, but especially into Florida, where they could get the brunt of this system. And then the northern branch too has that impacted storm with that powerful low pressure center that will be moving its heavy rains and that severe storms, and then kind of, more or less travailing across this boundary from, west to east, and produce some pretty heavy rain along its way, and higher wind gusts as well. So if we take a look at the winds just kind of over the next 48 hours, we can see these, are pretty significant, especially across the middle of the country where you're underneath that low pressure center. We could be looking at 60, 70, upwards to maybe 80-mile-per-hour wind gusts is likely not out of the question within this region, where that low pressure center will be deepening down to a 985 millibar. And then we'll have our own wind gusts associated with that tropical type entity down here in the Gulf that's going to be spreading its moisture back into Florida and eventually heading back out into the open waters of the Atlantic. But there's the snow flying, folks. I mean, we're getting into the transition where we getting deeper into October, and so that these areas are going to be transferring, as cold air intrusions come in. We're going to start to talk about a lot more snow starting to fly across these regions. And this is likely the biggest snowfall we've seen yet this fall. And so it's the middle of October. Definitely not unlikely to see it this time of year, but definitely highly, some of these areas, even maybe 18 inches of snowfall, 1 foot to 18 inches of snowfall across these regions is definitely, can't be ruled out. And here's where the low pressure center and the moisture is. You can kind of see it here coming out of Nebraska, highlighted right over Iowa here, but just to the right of that on the eastward flank, that's where the moisture is, that's where the instability. And then of course you got extremely dry air on the backside, so you definitely cool down quick. So if it's kind of humid in your backyard right now across these areas, it's going to feel a welcome relief once that cold front enters the picture, likely into midday Monday morning, heading into the afternoon time frame. But you're still going to be in the warm sector, and you're still going to be in the rain sector, as you highlighted, into the Illinois region as we get into the afternoon time frame on Friday. So this is where the low pressure is, likely highlighted across portions of Iowa. It's going to spread some heavier precipitation into Wisconsin, back into Illinois, getting into Arkansas, and that's going to fishtail back into portions of western Kentucky into the Indiana region. And look what happens further south, folks. Florida just can't get a break as they get inundated with, again, more heavy rain across this, as this convective complex of storms will just be kind of like a funnel training into the same places over and over again, with just some heavier rainfall. And I think that it likely kind of just extends into the Saturday time frame. So we got that low pressure to the north that's going to be traversing across, now really kind of highlighted over the Ohio region, back into Kentucky, into West Virginia, into the Pennsylvania region. Will eventually head over to New Jersey by then. And then of course further south, we still have that training rain over the same areas back into central Florida. There's the low pressure as it continues to verse across, and as it moves off the coastline, likely in somewhere in the Delaware vicinity by the time we head into the evening time frame on Saturday. And then the middle of the country, that's an area where they are going to have the high pressure trailing on the backside. So you got very dry air, you've got radiational cooling, and as this high kind of settles, the winds will settle too, and the temperatures will be allowed to drop, especially as the sun goes down. And as it cools, those temperatures are going to definitely feel a lot more like fall out here, as we'll be watching this low pressure. And there are some of the temperatures as you wake up on Sunday morning. We've got these areas in blue that are definitely below freezing across these regions in the northern tier, where it's got left that blanket of snow. So we could be looking at still some snow on the ground going into that Sunday time frame, and that's going to allow those temperatures to drop a little bit further. And as you can see, you extend further to the south into the Oklahoma region, back into the 40s, going into the upper 40s into the Texas panhandle. But those 50s, low 50s, extend all the way into the southeast, and eventually that colder air is going to end up in the southeast. So there's where that low pressure is on Sunday. So I think it continues to migrate and kind of push off the eastern shores. So we're not left with any kind of like torrential flooding rains because the speed of the system, the low pressure will continue to be on the move and move its precipitation and move its instability kind of well offshore by the time we head into that later Sunday time frame. But what's left is the significant trough on the backside, and definitely some of the coolest temperatures you've seen so far this fall back into the Carolinas. That extends into the southeast and eventually get back down into Florida. Believe it or not, Florida is going to be definitely on the chillier side. We're talking maybe upper 40s by the time we get into the middle of next week. In the Florida Panhandle, look at that low pressure where the 5,000, up about 5,000 feet. It's got some very cold air aloft, and that is going to be able to settle down to the surface. And I think that's when temperatures are really going to start to bottom out going into your Tuesday, Wednesday morning time frame across the deep south, and as well as into the southeast, but especially into the Florida region. And I think that actually extends all the way into Miami with those cooler temperatures, likely maybe in the upper 50s, all the way down into the Miami region. But taking a look at the ensembles, that cold air kind of sticks around for several days to come, as most of the ensembles are definitely kind of hinting at by the time we head into the early part of next week, middle of next week, most of the east and the southeast is going to continue to remain on the cooler side, where most of the western regions, the central and western regions, will definitely remain on the well above average side. And that's exactly what the Climate Prediction Center is kind of like depicting on their latest update going into next week. The warmer than average air continues to pull out west, and you have that demarcation line in the middle of the country. But the coolest anomalies will be again across the southeast, but especially across the deep south into Florida as we get into the middle of next week. And here's the breakdown of those two systems over the next 7 days. So we're going to have this system that the remnants from Lydia came from Puerto Vallarta back into the Gulf of Mexico, spreading its heavy rains into the southeast and especially into Florida. And then you have that northern branch too, the system that's coming on shore right now, spreading its heavy rains along the coastal regions, along the Pacific Northwest, but then really start to get its act together once it hits the Rockies into Wyoming, and then fishtailing across into the Dakotas, into Minnesota, back into Iowa, into Wisconsin, into northern portions of Illinois, spreading those 2 to 4 inch rain amounts. And then as you get into the mid-Atlantic regions, with that low pressure continuing to move across and being a little bit more progressive now, it's not going to leave as more significant rains than kind of earlier thought with this particular system. So guys, I appreciate you guys watching. I do like this video. Definitely hit the subscribe button and catch my next update. Why I protect you for and after the storm.